The United Mexican States, or Estados Unidos Mexicano in Español, is a country with a strong sense of rich culture and religious pride that shows their worth both in their people and in their socioeconomic outcomes in international business. Hello, my name is James Marks, and I am joined by Casey Ferguson, Zachary Frye, Kevin Gross, and Tomika Maniss. Over the next 20 minutes, my team and I will hold discussion on the socioeconomic conditions of Mexico, the barriers and challenges they face, and the opportunities that are available to them, if they are willing and able to capitalize on them. There are roughly 130.36 million Mexican citizens as of 2017. Mexico has a GDP purchasing power parity of roughly $16,900. The economy is primarily one of exports, with the USA being their largest trading partner. Mexico faces many challenges to its socioeconomic and industrial conditions. Some of these forces include, but are not limited to, declines in oil exports by almost 50%, drug cartels, lack of infrastructure needed for industry, cheap corn flooding the Mexican market causing loss of jobs and stagnating their wages resulting from NAFTA, and threats to free trade with the United States. To overcome these challenges, Mexico will need to employ a multi-pronged diversification strategy to increase its trading partners, to promote additional industries, to increase wages and the number of jobs, to reduce the criminal element, to improve the national infrastructure, and to increase regulations, laws, and law enforcement.
Hello everybody, my name is Tomika. I'm going to present on this Mexico's socioeconomic culture and religion. The United Mexican States is the third largest country in Latin America, following just behind Brazil and Argentina, with a current population of over 130 million people. Mexico is home to the world's largest population of Spanish speakers. More and more Mexicans migrate every year to highly populated cities. There are over 79% currently living in Mexico's urban areas in 2018. Mexico's land covers 750,563 square miles, and there works out to be about 174 people per mile. Mexicans' life expectancy used to peak right around 30 years old, whereas today their life expectancy is now 72 for men and 78 years old for women. The largest ethnic group consists of over 64% Mestizos. There are many indigenous groups in Mexico, including Toltec, Olmeca, Zapotec, Maya, Aztec, Tarahumara, and many, many more. Historically, Mexico's population has fluctuated quite a bit over the years. The average annual growth rate is 3%. In the 1980s and 90s, the population decreased by 1%. Early on, life expectancy for both men and women in Mexico was actually under 30 years of age. The first of Mexico's peoples are the Olmecs, who lived in the Gulf Coast during 1200 to 400 BC. The Mayans, during 250 and 900 AD, they created a calendar, a writing system, and designed cities that were functional hubs for the outlying towns. The Mayans eventually overpopulated the area, and it is believed that they succumbed to what was most likely an ecological imbalance in the early 10th century. The Toltecs inhabited central Mexico and built Tula. They are also believed to have lived at the Mayan site in northern Yucatan. The Aztecs became more dominant in 1427 by creating an alliance with the Toltecs and Mayans. Eventually, the Aztecs ruled over 5 million people. Mexico's constitution guarantees separation of church and state. However, more than 80% of Mexico's population are affiliated with Roman Catholicism. The various indigenous groups early on in Mexico's existence, the Toltecs and Mayans, believed in many different gods. The two main gods, Quetzalcoatl, which means plumed serpent, and Tezcatlipoca, which means smoked mirror. The Toltec religion was polytheistic. There were many gods they worshipped, and they often appeased those gods by making human sacrifices. In the 1500s, Hernan Cortes from Spain conquered the Aztecs, calling it Nueva España, New Spain. The new diseases introduced into the country killed more than 24 million indigenous people between 1521 and 1605. The Catholic Church had become very prominent during this time, setting up churches throughout the country and bringing in missionaries. King Carlos III eventually had expelled the Jesuits from New Spain in the late 1700s, but despite this, the religion still dominates over other practices throughout Mexico. Before the migration of Europeans into Mexico, most indigenous peoples inhabited the central, west, and southern highland regions. Spaniards moved into existing indigenous areas, rural areas, to exploit labor in agriculture and mining. During the mid to late 16th century, silver mining towns emerged, like Durango, San Luis Potosi. This was the start of European settlements outside the central core. During the mid-19th century, larger-scale ranching began in northern Mexico, and then Mexico saw internal migration in the mid-20th century. The migration from rural residences to bigger city, primarily due to lack of land, job opportunities, and social opportunities. NAFTA and other trade policies drastically affected increasing migration from the rural towns to cities. Mexico's drug cartel also plays a role in Mexico's culture and impact on economy. There is no armed conflict or civil war currently in Mexico. However, Mexico is considered one of the most dangerous places in the world. Since 2006, it has been estimated over 80,000 crime-related homicides, 26,000 missing persons in Mexico between 2006 and 2012. 2013, 90% of the cocaine that ended up in the U.S. passed through Mexico. Between January and March 2013, Mexican law enforcement had seized over 3 metric tons of cocaine.
The Mexican government, political, and legal system slide deck was created by Zach Frye, presented by James Marks. Mexico is a federal republic that is composed of 31 states and a federal district, which is Mexico City, Mexico. The governmental power has 3 branches, and those are the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. Each of these states elects its own governor and legislature, while the municipal authorities are chosen more locally. The country has 9 major political parties. These 9 parties include the Institutional Revolutionary Party, the National Action Party, the Democratic Revolutionary Party, the Labor Party, the Green Ecological Party, the New Alliance Party, Citizens Movement Party, the National Regeneration Movement, and the Social Encounter Party. Mexico's legal system is run through a civil law approach, where there is more focus on individual freedom and follows the idea where there is cooperation between human beings. Due to Mexico having a poor justice system, the country has seen a drop in economic growth and potential investors. A lot of this has to do with the corruption that the country unfortunately deals with heavily. It is said that in 2010, Mexicans paid 32 billion peso, almost $2.5 billion US, in bribes. Authorities in Mexico are trying to stop this by creating a national system and managing the development of anti-corruption guidelines at all levels of Mexican government, from the federal to the local and municipal level. Mexico has grown its economy through their free trade agreements as of 1990, and its trade policy is among the most open in the world. Mexico has a total of 11 free trade agreements involving 46 countries, the United States being their most significant trading partner. In 2016, the GDP from trade of Mexico was about $1.05 trillion. Mexico is part of an electoral democracy. Mexico has many governing challenges. Considered the third largest exporter country worldwide of information technology services, Mexico has recently moved to create more skilled jobs. They want to promote growth and create jobs in information technology and information and technology-enabled services.
So for the Mexican industry, Mexico in 2017, Mexico had the 9th largest economy in the world. Some of those sectors of the Mexican economy include agriculture, electronics, oil and energy, manufacturing and retail, and service. The United States and Mexico have a very strong relationship in terms of agriculture. In 2016, Mexico exported $23.8 billion into the United States, while at the same time, the United States and Mexico allowed this relationship allowed the United States to receive 53% of Mexico's agricultural exports. Those are pretty substantial numbers. And in 1994, the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, was put into place, and this allowed for Mexico to really expand in their agricultural exports, in their agricultural industry. Another sector in the Mexican industry that produces a very large amount of revenue for the United States is oil. Mexico has the third largest output of oil of barrels per day in North America at about 2.1 million. And of course, the United States and Mexico are going to have a relationship because of this. In 2016, 437 million barrels of oil were imported into the United States, and that alone contributed to 32% of the United States' government revenue. A third industry in Mexico that's pretty substantial is the electronics sector. Mexico has 10 manufacturing locations, and each location is kind of divvied up, and they focus on different aspects. Say, for instance, Northwest Mexico focuses on aerospace, automotive, and telecommunications. In the western area of Mexico, they focus on high-tech components for computers and appliances and things of that nature. One manufacturing community, Jalisco, invested $14 billion that's home to 12 manufacturing OEMs and 14 EMS companies that generate $150 billion every year. And the references are listed the bottom of the page here, Electronics Manufacturing in Mexico 2017. This was retrieved from a website, offshoregroup.com. Mexico Country Commercial Guide 2017. Mexican Agriculture retrieved from export.gov, and the same website there for the next resource for oil and gas. Thank you.
Mexico, over the last decade, has become a country and an economy that is one of the world leaders. Mexico's economy, as measured by the gross domestic product, is the 12th largest in the world. Hello everyone, my name is James Marks, and I'll be spending the next few minutes talking about the Mexican economic system. The economic system of Mexico is one that is driven heavily off of exports. In fact, Mexico is the 13th largest exporter in the world, with over 80% of its exports going to the United States. Being so heavily reliant on the United States' individual purchasing power, economic situations in the United States can cause a significant effect on the total or nominal GDP of Mexico. Mexico has free trade agreements with over 45 countries, with over 80% of its trade occurring under these agreements. Mexico is made up of both private and state-run business, also known as a mixed economy. The economy of Mexico is relatively stable in that it has seen sure and steady growth each year in recent history, except for the world economic recession of 2008. With a disproportionate share of its exports going to the United States, the reduction in individual purchasing power in the U.S. in 2008 caused a decline of nearly 6 to 8% in the Mexican GDP that year. Unemployment is extraordinarily low, hovering around 2.5%. However, underemployment, defined as not having enough paid work, such as not having enough hours, or work that does not make full use of skills, is closer to 25%. Mexico's economy and federal revenues rely heavily on remittances. Remittances are earnings sent by the Mexican nationals who live abroad to their families back in Mexico. The nationals primarily reside in the United States. In fact, in 2015, remittances superseded oil in becoming the largest source of foreign income. In 2016, quarter one, remittances were approximately $6.2 billion. This is approximately 56% higher than oil from the same period, showing a dramatic shift in foreign income sources. A previous finance minister of Mexico, Pedro Aspe, stated that there were two main causalities. First, and primarily, oil exports have fallen annually by nearly 7% year over year, and the price of crude has plummeted by over 55%. The second factor is that there have been more jobs that are paying better wages for Mexican workers in the United States. There are several challenges faced by the Mexican economy. The drug cartels continue to be the primary instigator. President Pena has committed to increasing defense spending from 1.5% of GDP to nearly 5% of GDP. His plan includes a draft identifying and adding 40,000 soldiers for police departments. Another challenge is the ever-increasing wage gap between the rich and the poor. Urban areas are seeing disproportionate increases to the Human Development Index relative to poorer rural regions, which are increasing but not nearly the rate as the former. With the two largest factors of the economy having an uncertain future, the economy has started to trend downwards. Oil prices and volume staying low, and remittances will likely be reduced. The latter is due to increases in deportations from the United States. National infrastructure is also a large barrier to increased economic activity. Basic infrastructure needed for businesses are not readily available in quantity or quality. This includes infrastructure such as roads, electricity, water, and the internet. The Mexican government has instituted a plan called the National Infrastructure Program, or Programa Nacional de Infraestructura, that is set to invest over $600 billion from 2014 to 2018 to improve these aspects of the Mexican economy. The Mexican gross domestic product has been steady with marginal increases year over year since 2014. According to the CIA World Factbook, Mexico places 12th among other worldly nations with a current GDP at $2.46 trillion in 2017. Mexico's individual purchasing power parity per capita is at $16,900. This standard puts Mexico solidly in the upper middle income range for countries. GDP growth per year has been relatively consistent over the last 5 years, notwithstanding a one-year dip in 2013, when oil prices and volume began to drop. This is likely due to a significant drop in investment and domestic demand in that time period, as demonstrated in the table before you. Despite the many challenges facing the Mexican economy, there are an equal or greater number of opportunities and countermeasures that the Mexican government can deploy. It will require a strong fiscal responsibility and sound decision-making to maintain or improve Mexico's global position.
When we talk about Mexico, we have to talk about NAFTA when we're talking about Mexico's economic systems. NAFTA is a North American free trade agreement that I'm sure most people have at least heard of or understand what NAFTA is. NAFTA was designed to eliminate most of the tariff and non-tariff barriers to free trade and investment between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. History of NAFTA, you look at the history, you have to look at how it all come to be. Originally, the United States and Canada signed a trade agreement in 1989. Once that trade agreement went into effect, Mexico decided that they wanted to join in those talks to try to advance their own economy. Once they joined into the talks in 1991 with Canada and the United States, and by the end of 1993, the three had reached a trade agreement and ratified it across the three countries. NAFTA went into effect January 1st, 1994. After NAFTA went into effect, there's been a lot of talk about its effects on jobs and wages and everything else. When we look at the job growth, the problem that we have is the numbers that come out of Mexico they're not easily researched. There's a lot of debate on the true job creation numbers in Mexico. The one number that we can research pretty well is manufacturing jobs, which the growth of manufacturing jobs in Mexico grew by 400,000. But the problem is, even though that sounds like a lot of jobs, the one consensus among everyone is that the number of jobs created was not what was expected in Mexico when they signed NAFTA into place. As far as job losses go, NAFTA decimated Mexico's agricultural industry. American companies moved in and took over a bunch of farms. They flooded the Mexican market with cheap corn coming out of the United States. So the small family-owned farms in Mexico couldn't compete with these prices. So they were forced to sell off to the corporations, who then came in and started producing agriculture on a commercial level. So the problem we had with that was it led to a stagnation in wages in Mexico and even in the United States. But especially in Mexico, all of those people that used to make their living in agriculture ended up moving to the manufacturing industry. But the problem was the manufacturing industry didn't pay the wages that everybody hoped was going to happen. So this led to a stagnation of wages when Mexico's hopes were that NAFTA was going to raise the wages in the country. Right now, the current state of NAFTA is sort of up in the air with a lot of talks of withdrawal from President Trump. The foreign investment in Mexico is one thing that has been that everybody sees as a success. No matter where you research it, there has been a very sharp increase in foreign investment in Mexico. Like I said, you had a bunch of commercial agriculture industry move in and invest money, and then you had a bunch of factories that were built along the northern border of Mexico with the United States, and a lot of money has been pumped into Mexico, especially in the auto industry. Trade growth has definitely grown also. Um, According to where you find your figures at, trade growth has increased by about fourfold. Um, Trade between the U.S. and Mexico grew by 255%, and between Mexico and Canada grew by 432.5%, according to Floyd. The other problem with NAFTA was the environmental impact. All of the manufacturing that sprung up on the northern border of Mexico created a ton of pollution that has been hotly debated on if those companies should pay to fix the pollution problem or if Mexico itself should be paying to fix that pollution problem. It's still a hotly debated topic. And outside of the manufacturing industry, in where the commercial companies took over agriculture, they started dumping a lot of fertilizers and pesticides that weren't there before, that has caused issues with runoff into water systems and stuff like that. As of now, the future is up in the air. President Trump is supposedly trying to renegotiate NAFTA to get better deals for the United States. So until all of that comes to light and what those talks are coming up with, then the future with NAFTA and Mexico and their trade with the United States and Canada is very much uncertain, and it's definitely a topic that is being spread across the news everywhere. NAFTA has its good points, but it's also had a lot of bad points, and it hasn't allowed Mexico to grow like they hoped it was going to.